The bacteria and archaea only have one kingdom. The rest of our 6 kingdoms is coming from the eukarya. So our eukarya, we have 4 kingdoms, but bacteria and archaea, we only have 1. Our bacterial kingdom is called Eubacteria, and our archaea kingdom is called Archaebacteria. These two used to be a single kingdom before we split them into different domains. Before we were able to identify a lot of the archaebacteria, remember, because they're extremophiles, they're going to be found in those very extreme environments. So before we were able to identify these, it was just one group, and we called it all bacteria. Later, when we were able to look at the cell wall and saw that archaea do not have peptidoglycan and bacteria do, that's how we were able to split them up. So they each have their own kingdom. We call bacteria Eubacteria, EU meaning true. So these are the true bacteria because they do have that peptidoglycan you would expect. And the archaea got a different prefix. They are the Archaebacteria. Personally, I wish they didn't keep the word bacteria on there, but they did, even though these guys in this kingdom are not bacteria. They are not belonging to the bacterial domain. The rest of this video will be focusing on the 4 eukaryotic kingdoms. These 4 kingdoms have different classification requirements. So some examples of questions that we would ask to see which kingdom our eukaryotic organism goes into would be, is our organism unicellular or multicellular? Does our organism have a cell wall? Does our organism have tissues? Is our organism an autotroph, meaning that it makes its own food, or is it a heterotroph, meaning that it gets its food from outside sources? I'm going to go through the 4 eukaryotic kingdoms now and set up a chart similar to what we did for the domains. Some of my categories that I'm going to organize these by are going to be the same, but some of them are going to be a little bit different. The first question I'm going to ask is whether the organisms are unicellular or multicellular. After that, I'm going to ask, is there a cell wall? The next step will be looking at each group's food source. And then I'm just going to have an other category, or other information. So first, I'm going to start by going through whether each of these are unicellular or multicellular. For fungi, there are some that are multicellular and some that are unicellular. So I'm going to start by writing both. But most fungi are going to be multicellular. Plants and animals are all multicellular. And protists, like fungi, can be either multicellular or unicellular, but most are unicellular. Most only have one cell. From there, we're going to look at whether or not each of these have a cell wall. Fungi do. Plants do as well. Animals such as ourselves do not have cell walls, and the protists, some of them have cell walls. For food, fungi are heterotrophs, meaning that they need outside nutrition, and they get their nutrients through absorption. They absorb their nutrients. Plants are a group of autotrophs, meaning that they make their own food through photosynthesis. Animals are heterotrophs. We have to digest our food. And protists, some are going to be autotrophs and some can be heterotrophs. So protists can be autotrophs that make their own food or heterotrophs that get their food from either digesting other organisms like animals or absorbing their nutrients like fungi. The last piece is just my other category, which I'm going to use to put in some important facts that further categorize each of these kingdoms. First, for the fungi, their cells are not organized into tissues. For plants do have tissue level organization. Plants do have different tissues. Animals also have tissue level organization, but for this other category, I want to write another characteristic of the kingdom Animalia, which is that to be in this kingdom, you have to be mobile, meaning you have to be able to move for at least part of your life cycle. That doesn't mean to be an animal you have to be moving all the time. It just means for part of your life cycle, you must be moving. As you can see by the complexity of our answers for all the other things here, protists are kind of like our catch-all. So if you can't put your organism into one of these three, pretty much that means you have a protist. So protists are mostly simple organisms. I'm going to call this the catch-all category. So if you don't fit as a fungus, a plant, or an animal, but you are eukaryotic, then you're gonna be a protist, whether you like it or not. Before ending the video, I want to give you an example for each kingdom. Fungi, I think, are pretty easy. You often think about mushrooms. Mold and yeast are also examples of fungi, and fungi reproduce by releasing spores. For our plants, there's a lot of different plants, but not all plants have flowers. You can also have ferns and mosses or conifers like our pine trees. For animals, I'm going to draw a little stick figure, one because it's easy, and two because a lot of people forget that we ourselves are animals. And then for my example of a protist, I'm going to draw an amoeba, and I'm going to give my amoeba a nucleus. Or maybe it has little hairs on it called cilia. All of these organisms look very different. They are in different kingdoms, but they're all grouped together under a single domain. All are eukaryotic organisms.